My mother waited until I had a fork full of chicken in my mouth before she told me they were disowning me. I think she planned it that way. She wanted to watch me choke. What she got instead was me chewing slowly, swallowing, smiling at her, and saying one word. Okay, that was it. That was the entire fight she had been building up to all week. One word and a smile, and then I asked my dad to pass the green beans. My name is Imogen Vance. I am an estate attorney. And the reason I smiled is because my mother had just made the worst mistake of her life, and she was not going to find out about it until 9 o'clock the next morning. I am 31 years old. I work at a small firm in Boston. I have spent the last 6 years of my career writing wills and trusts for wealthy people who do not want their children fighting over their money after they die. I know exactly how inheritance law works in this state. I know it better than my parents do. I know it better than my brother does. I know it so well that on the night my mother demanded I sign over the inheritance my grandmother had left me, I already knew, before I had even put down my fork, that they could not actually take it from me. They were bluffing. They just did not know they were bluffing yet. I smiled because I was about to teach them. Before I tell you what I did the next morning, before the sun came up, before my parents knew anything had changed, I want you to do me one favor. Hit subscribe. And tell me in the comments the moment in your life when you realized somebody in your family was never going to choose you back. Not the moment you wished it had been different. The moment you knew. I read every comment. Now let me back up and tell you how we got to that dinner. My grandmother's name was Eleanor Vance. She was my father's mother. She was the only person in my entire family who had ever looked at me and seen me clearly. She had been a widow since I was 9, when my grandfather died of a heart attack on a golf course in Connecticut, and after that she had lived alone in a small white house outside Boston, with a garden full of hydrangeas and a kitchen that always smelled like cardamom, because she had become friends with a Persian woman down the street and had picked up the habit of putting it in everything. I used to spend summers with my grandmother when I was a child. My parents would drop me off in June and pick me up in August, and during the months in between, I was the only thing in my grandmother's world. We would garden in the morning, we would read in the afternoon, we would walk to the small library 2 blocks from her house and bring home stacks of books. She would let me have ice cream for dinner if I had been good. She would tell me stories about her own mother, who had come to America from Wales with nothing, and about her own grandmother, who had run a boarding house in Cardiff before she died. My grandmother used to look at me sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary moment, and shake her head a little, and say, "Imogen, you see things, don't you? You see things the rest of them do not see." I never knew what to say to that when I was 8. By the time I was 18, I understood what she meant. My grandmother died when I was 26. She had been sick for 2 years. I had flown home every other weekend during those 2 years to sit with her. My brother Garrett, who lived 20 minutes from her house, had visited her 4 times in 2 years. My parents had visited her twice a month, mostly when they wanted something. My grandmother had noticed all of this without saying a word about it. When she died, her will surprised everybody. She had left her house to a local hospice charity. She had left a small amount of money to my parents, which was less than they had been expecting. She had left nothing at all to Garrett, and she had left the rest of her estate, which turned out to be considerably more than anyone in the family had realized she had, to me. The total value, after the house was sold and her investments were liquidated, came to just under $1.8 million. My grandmother had been quietly investing for 40 years. She had never told anyone. She had lived in that small white house with the hydrangeas and the cardamom kitchen, and she had spent her days reading library books, and she had owned an investment portfolio that would have made my father's stomach hurt if he had known about it while she was alive. He found out at the reading of the will. I watched his face. He did not look sad about losing his mother. He looked furious about losing his inheritance to me. That was 5 years ago. For 5 years, my parents had been trying, in 100 small and increasingly desperate ways, to get that money out of my hands and into Garrett's. Garrett had decided, 2 years before our grandmother died, that he was going to be a venture capitalist. He had no training in finance. He had no work experience in finance. He had a degree in marketing communications from a state school and a habit of using words like synergy and disruption in conversations that did not require either word. My father had been bankrolling Garrett's attempts at being a venture capitalist for 3 years. Garrett had lost money on every single investment he had ever made. By the time of the dinner I am telling you about, my parents had drained most of their own savings, keeping Garrett afloat. The next stop, in their minds, was the money my grandmother had left me. They had asked me for it, in different ways, many times. They had asked me to invest it in Garrett's fund. I had said no. They had asked me to loan it to Garrett at 0 interest. I had said no. They had asked me to put it in a joint account with Garrett so that he could draw on it when he needed it. I had said no. They had told me, repeatedly, that grandmother had clearly meant for the money to be shared with the family, and that I was being selfish by keeping it. They had said that grandmother had probably been confused at the end. They had said the will should have been challenged in probate. It was too late to challenge it now, but I should make it right voluntarily, because that was what a good daughter would do. I had said no, every time, in increasingly polite language. The dinner I told you about was the last time they asked. It was supposed to be a regular Sunday family dinner. My mother had called me on Friday and said it was important that I come. She had said my father wanted to talk to me about something. I had assumed it was about Garrett. It was always about Garrett. I drove out to my parents' house in the suburbs that Sunday afternoon. I had no idea what I was walking into. I parked in their driveway. I went inside. I helped my mother set the table. I made small talk with my father in the living room while he watched a sports game I did not care about. Garrett came down the stairs at 6:15, wearing a polo shirt and the strained smile of somebody who knew what was about to happen. We sat down to dinner at 6:30. My mother served roast chicken and green beans and a potato dish she had been making since I was a child. We ate for about 15 minutes. We talked about nothing. The weather. A neighbor who had repainted her shutters. My father's new car. And then, somewhere around 6:45, my mother put down her fork, picked up her wine glass, and dropped the bomb. She said, "Imogen, your father and I have decided that things have to change. We have given you 5 years to come around on your own. You have not. Garrett needs that money. He has been working very hard, and he is on the verge of a real breakthrough, and your father and I cannot continue to support him out of our retirement. So we have decided. You are going to sign the inheritance over to your brother by the end of the week, or you are no longer welcome in this family." She said it like she was telling me the chicken needed more salt. I want to walk you through what was happening in my head in the 7 seconds between her saying that and me saying okay, because I want you to understand that the smile was not a reflex. The smile was a calculation. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed a losing chess move by someone who thought they were playing checkers. The first thing I thought was that my mother had clearly never asked an actual estate attorney whether what she was demanding was legally possible, because the inheritance had not been left to the family. It had been left specifically to me, by name, in a will that had been filed in probate court 5 years earlier and could not be retroactively rewritten. I could choose to give the money to my brother as a gift. Nobody could force me to. There was no legal mechanism for what my mother was describing. There was no document I could sign that would make the inheritance Garrett's by some kind of family decree. The only way the money was going to Garrett was if I voluntarily transferred it to him, which I was not going to do, and which my mother had no power to make me do. She did not know that. My father did not know that. Garrett certainly did not know that. They had spent a week building up the courage to threaten me with a punishment that, legally, did not exist. The second thing I thought was that my mother had also clearly never asked herself what disowning me would actually accomplish. I was 31 years old. I lived 2 hours away. I had my own apartment, my own job, my own life, and my own money. The only thing being disowned by my parents would actually cost me was emotional. They were not paying my rent. They were not on my health insurance. They were not even claiming me on their taxes. Disowning me, at this point in my life, was a punishment with no teeth. It was a threat that only worked if I cared more about being in the family than I cared about my own grandmother's wishes. They had completely misjudged how much I cared. They had built their entire negotiating position on the assumption that I would crumble when faced with the loss of them. They had not realized that I had been quietly making peace with that loss for 5 years already, every single time they asked for Grandma's money in a slightly different voice. The third thing I thought was about my grandmother. I thought about the cardamom kitchen. I thought about the hydrangeas. I thought about the way she had looked at me when I was 8 years old and told me I saw things the rest of them did not see. I thought about the will she had written, which had bypassed her son and bypassed her grandson and given everything to the granddaughter who had spent every summer with her for 15 years. My grandmother had known exactly what she was doing when she wrote that will. She had been telling me something. She had been saying, in legal language, that she trusted me, that she did not trust them, that she wanted the money to do something good in the world, and she wanted me to be the one to decide what that good thing was. I had been thinking about what to do with that money for 5 years. I had not done anything with it yet. I had let it sit in a careful set of investments, growing slowly, while I figured out what my grandmother would have wanted. The dinner my mother was hosting that night, without realizing it, had just made my decision for me. The fourth thing I thought was that I needed to get out of that house, get back to my own apartment, and call a colleague at my firm before midnight. So I smiled. I said, okay. I finished my dinner. I told my mother the chicken was wonderful. I helped her clear the dishes. I hugged my father at the door. I told Garrett I would see him soon. I drove the 2 hours back to my apartment with my hands at perfect 10 and 2 on the steering wheel and my brain moving at the speed of a freight train. I want you to understand what an irrevocable trust is, because it is the legal instrument that ended my family the next morning. A revocable trust is a container you can change your mind about. You put your assets into it, and you can take them back out whenever you want. It offers some protection from probate, but it is not a fortress. The person who creates the trust still controls the assets. An irrevocable trust is a different animal entirely. Once you put assets into it, you cannot take them back. Not next year. Not in 10 years. Not ever. The assets belong to the trust now. The trust has its own legal identity, separate from you, with its own rules and its own purposes spelled out in the founding documents. You can be a beneficiary of the trust. You can be a trustee of the trust. But you cannot, under any circumstance, undo it. It is the legal equivalent of putting something in a bank vault and then throwing away the key, with the understanding that there is no other key. When I got back to my apartment that night, I called a colleague at my firm named Mr. Kashyap. He had been my mentor for 6 years. He picked up on the second ring even though it was almost 10 at night, because he had 2 grown daughters, and he understood that when a young woman calls her mentor at 10 on a Sunday, it is usually important. I told him what had happened at dinner. I told him what I wanted to do. I asked him if it was possible to draft and execute the documents before 9 the next morning, when my parents were going to start expecting me to call them and arrange the signing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Imogen, are you sure?" "I have been thinking about it for 5 years," I said. "Tonight just made it real. This is permanent. You understand that. Once we do this, the money is gone. You will be a board member of the foundation. You will have a salary if you choose. You will be able to direct the giving. But the money will not be yours anymore. It will belong to a charitable foundation, in your grandmother's name, forever. That is what I want. You will never be able to give it to your brother. I know. You will never be able to give it to yourself. I know. Your parents are going to be very angry." "Yes," I said. "I am aware." He sighed. He said, "Okay, meet me at the office at 6 in the morning. Bring everything. We are going to draft this thing and have it executed before they finish their coffee." I did not sleep that night. I packed a folder with every document I needed. The original will, the records of the inheritance transfers, the investment statements, my identification, my notarization records, because I happened to be a notary myself, but we were going to need an independent notary for the trust documents, which Mr. Kashyap had already promised to arrange. I drove to my office at 5:45 in the morning. The streets were empty. The sky was the color of old metal. I had a thermos of coffee in my passenger seat and a folder of documents in my lap, and I felt the same kind of bright clarity I had felt at dinner the night before, the calm of a person who has stopped negotiating and started executing. The building was empty. The lobby was lit only by the safety lights. The security guard, who had known me for 6 years, nodded at me without comment. I rode the elevator up to the 7th floor. Mr. Kashyap was already there, in the conference room, with 2 coffees and a stack of trust template documents. He looked up when I came in. He said, "Imogen, last chance. Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "Sit down." We worked for almost 3 hours. We drafted a trust called the Eleanor Vance Foundation. The purpose of the trust was to fund educational scholarships for first-generation college students from working-class families, with a particular focus on women pursuing degrees in the humanities, because my grandmother had wanted to be a literature professor when she was young and had not been able to afford to go to college. The trust was funded with the entirety of my inheritance. The founding documents named me as one of 3 trustees. They named 2 other independent trustees, who Mr. Kashyap had pre-cleared for emergencies like this one. The trust was irrevocable. It could not be undone by me, by my parents, by my brother, or by anybody else, ever. We built it the way you build a wall in a flood, quickly, carefully, tall enough. At 8:45, we executed the documents. A notary that Mr. Kashyap had asked to come in early stamped them. The transfer of assets to the trust was initiated at 9 o'clock sharp. By the time my mother was reaching for her phone to call me, the money was no longer mine. It was a foundation's. It was my grandmother's, in spirit, the way she had wanted it to be all along. My mother called me at 9:15. She wanted to know what time I was going to be at their house to sign the papers. I told her I would be there by 11. She told me my father had cleared his schedule. She told me Garrett was going to be there. She told me she had baked a coffee cake, like we were celebrating a birthday. I drove to my parents' house. I brought my folder with me. The folder did not contain the documents my mother thought it contained. The folder contained the executed trust documents, the confirmation of the asset transfer, and a letter I had typed at 3 in the morning explaining what I had done. I parked in their driveway. I walked inside. My father was sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee. My mother was setting up the kitchen table with the coffee cake and 3 plates. Garrett was standing in the doorway, looking like he had won the lottery. "Imogen," my mother said. "Sit down. Let's get this done. I have the papers your father drew up." The papers my father had drawn up, I learned later, were a homemade document he had pulled off the internet and modified. They were not enforceable. They would not have transferred anything. My parents had been planning to bully me into signing a piece of paper that did not actually do what they wanted it to do, and then to call the inheritance Garrett's based on that piece of paper. I sat down. I put my folder on the table. I opened it. "Mom," I said. "Dad. Garrett. I need to tell you something before we go any further." My mother smiled. She thought I was about to give a speech about family. She thought I was about to say how much I had thought about it overnight and how grateful I was to have parents who were willing to be honest with me. She thought she had won. "I drafted some papers of my own last night," I said. "I think you should see them before we move forward." I slid the folder across the table. My father picked it up. He started reading. The color drained out of his face about 4 seconds in. He kept reading. He turned to the second page. He kept reading. By the time he got to the 5th page, his hands were shaking. "Imogen," he said, "what is this?" "That is the founding document of the Eleanor Vance Foundation," I said. "It was created last night. It was funded this morning. The entire inheritance Grandma left me has been transferred into a charitable trust in her name. The trust is irrevocable. The money is no longer mine to give. It is no longer Garrett's to receive. It is going to fund scholarships for first-generation college students, the way Grandma would have wanted, in perpetuity. I am a trustee, but not a beneficiary. I cannot take the money out. Nobody can. It is gone." My mother said, "What?" "I will read it to you slowly," I said. "Last night, after dinner, I called a colleague at my firm. We met at 6 this morning. We drafted an irrevocable charitable trust in Grandma's name. We funded it with my entire inheritance. The transfer was completed an hour ago. The money is now the property of the Eleanor Vance Foundation. Neither of you, nor Garrett, nor I, has any way of accessing it for personal use. Ever." My mother stood up. She knocked her chair backwards. She said, "You ungrateful, vindictive, selfish little Imogen. How could you? How could you do this to your own family?" "You told me last night," I said calmly, "that I was no longer in this family unless I signed the inheritance over to Garrett. So I'm no longer in this family. You set the terms. I am abiding by them. The only difference is that the inheritance is also no longer in this family. It is doing what Grandma wanted it to do." "You are a monster," my mother said. "You are a horrible, vindictive monster." "I am an estate attorney," I said. "And you forgot to ask me, in 5 years of trying to bully this money out of me, whether what you were demanding was legally possible. It was not. You also forgot that I am the person Grandma chose to leave it to. She knew what she was doing. She had been watching you for 40 years. She made a decision. I am honoring it. I am the only person in this room who is honoring it." Garrett, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. He said, "So I am not getting anything." "Garrett," I said, "you were never getting anything. Grandma made her position on you very clear when she wrote you out of her will 5 years ago. You have spent 5 years pretending that decision did not happen. It happened. She did not want you to have her money. She did not think you would do anything good with it. She was right. You have lost every dollar Dad has given you. You would have lost hers too. She knew that. That is why she wrote the will the way she did." He stood up. He walked out of the room. He went up the stairs. I heard his bedroom door close. My father had not moved. He was still holding the trust documents. He was reading them again, slowly, the way a person reads bad news a second time, hoping it will say something different. "Dad," I said, "I am going to leave now. I want you to know something before I go. Grandma loved you. She wrote you out because she was angry, but she still loved you. She told me once, in her last year, that she hoped you would figure out what you had done by the time you were her age. She said you still had time. She told me to be patient with you. I have been patient with you for 5 years. I am not going to be patient anymore. I am going to live my life. You are welcome to figure out what you have done at your own pace. But you are not going to do it on my time, or on Grandma's money, or on Garrett's behalf." My father looked up at me. His eyes were wet. He said, "Imogen, I am sorry." I did not know what to say to that. I had never heard my father apologize for anything in my life. I do not know what he was apologizing for. I do not know if he knew himself. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. I picked up my folder. I left. I have not spoken to my parents since. That was 3 years ago. My mother sent me a long letter about 6 months after the trust was finalized, explaining all of the ways I had hurt the family. I did not respond. Garrett moved back in with my parents within a year of the dinner. He has not started another company. He works at a hardware store. I hear about him through a cousin who still talks to me. The cousin says Garrett is angry. Apparently, he tells anyone who will listen that I stole his inheritance. He never mentions that Grandma did not leave him an inheritance to begin with. He never mentions that the money was never his. The Eleanor Vance Foundation has given out 42 scholarships in 3 years. We have funded 42 first-generation college students from working-class families. Most of them are women. Most of them are pursuing degrees in literature, history, and the arts. My grandmother, who never got to go to college, is now in the room with all of them. Her name is on every check. Her photograph hangs in the small office I rent for the foundation. I keep cardamom on my desk, in a small jar, because the smell of it reminds me of her kitchen. Mr. Kashyap retired from the firm last year. He sits on the foundation board with me. He calls me on Sundays sometimes, just to see how I am doing. He brings his wife to our scholarship ceremonies. He has become, in many ways, the closest thing I have to a parent. I want to tell you what I have learned, because I think it matters. When somebody in your life forces you to choose between yourself and them, the choice has already been made. They made it. They handed it to you. Your job is not to talk them out of it. Your job is not to spend the rest of your life trying to convince them they were wrong to put you in that position in the first place. Your job is to read the script they handed you, decide whether you want to read it, and then write your own ending if you do not. You can write a different ending in one night, if you have the right pen. The pen does not have to be a lawyer at 6 in the morning, although that is a good pen. The pen can be a one-way plane ticket. The pen can be a packed bag. The pen can be a phone call to somebody who has been waiting for you to make it. The pen can be a single sentence, said out loud, that ends a 30-year pretense. Whatever pen you have, the principle is the same. The script they handed you is not the only script in the room. You have a pen too. Most people, when they are pushed to the edge by their own family, spend years trying to convince the family to step back from the edge. They do not realize that the family pushed them to the edge on purpose, because the family wanted them to fall, because falling would have made the family more comfortable. The way out is not to convince them you should not fall. The way out is to step off the edge yourself, in a direction they did not expect, and to land somewhere they cannot reach. I landed in a charitable foundation. You might land somewhere else. The destination is not the point. The point is that you gotta choose the destination, instead of waiting for the people who pushed you to choose it for you. I want to ask you something before you go. I have heard a lot of stories from people in the comments of these videos. I have heard stories that have stayed with me for weeks. Tonight I want to ask you a very specific question. What is the one thing you have, right now, in your life, that nobody can take from you? It does not have to be money. It can be a skill. It can be a friendship. It can be a memory. It can be a piece of knowledge. It can be a capacity for kindness, or a sense of humor, or a particular kind of stubborn that has kept you alive when easier people would have given up. Tell me in the comments. The thing nobody can take from you is the thing your real life is built on. Sometimes we forget we have it. Tell me yours, so I can remember mine. I will be reading every single comment. I will see you in the next one.